It started like every other promise of progress. New roads, better parks, a cleaner, safer community. The kind of words that make homeowners nod in agreement and say, finally, someone's fixing things. But behind the glossy brochures and smiling committee members, something darker was brewing. Land was disappearing. Rules were changing overnight. And the same people who claimed to be improving the neighborhood were secretly selling it out from under everyone's feet. One man thought he was attending just another HOA meeting. Instead, he uncovered a plan so big, it stretched far beyond his quiet suburban street. A plan hidden behind legal jargon, corporate shells, and government deals that no one was supposed to question. This is the story of Willow Creek Estates, a story of ordinary people caught in an extraordinary deception, where community improvement was the cover, and the real mission was a land grab. Because sometimes, the danger isn't what's coming from outside your neighborhood. It's what's already living inside it. Soft beat fades in. Slow, cinematic rise. Welcome to, they called it community improvement, but it was really a land grab. Spring came early that year in Willow Creek Estates. The lawns were greener than usual, the magnolia trees in bloom, and the neighborhood Facebook page was full of cheerful posts about garage sales and garden competitions. Everything looked perfect, at least from the outside. But on a bright Saturday morning, something new arrived at every doorstep. Glossy envelopes, stamped with the HOA's golden logo. Inside, a letter titled, The Willow Creek Community Improvement Plan, promised everything people wanted to hear. New sidewalks, fresh landscaping, upgraded lighting, a modern playground for the kids, even a community fitness center. To most, it sounded like a dream come true, a sign that their HOA dues were finally being used for something that mattered. Eli Turner read the letter at his kitchen table while his daughter colored beside him. The words were warm and inviting: beautify, enhance, revitalize. But one phrase stood out: property realignment and future growth. He didn't know what it meant exactly, but it felt off. His wife, Sarah, brushed it off. You always worry too much, she said with a soft laugh. It's probably just more parking spaces or something. But Eli wasn't so sure. Later that week, the HOA held a special meeting at the clubhouse. The kind where the whole community shows up in their best clothes, holding coffee cups and polite smiles. The air was full of chatter and optimism. Cameras clicked as the HOA president, Richard Kane, took the stage. Kane was everything you'd expect from a man in charge. Tall, confident, the kind of voice that fills a room. His suit was spotless, his grin even more so. Behind him hung a giant banner, Building a Better Tomorrow for Willow Creek. He tapped the microphone, smiled, and began. Richard Kane recorded, echoing voice. My friends, our community is growing, and it's time we grow with it. For too long, we've relied on outdated infrastructure and neglected spaces. But today, that changes. We're moving forward, together. Applause fills the room. Music swells hopefully. Kane spoke with passion. He talked about modernizing the storm drains, adding walking trails, installing security cameras. Every idea drew more applause. Every promise sounded bigger than the last. And then, with a practiced smile, he said something few noticed at the time. We've also identified underutilized areas of our neighborhood, spaces that could serve the greater good if repurposed properly. Don't worry, it's all part of our long-term vision. No one questioned it. Why would they? The plan looked professional, the budget transparent, and the board seemed united. The homeowners trusted them. After all, they were neighbors. Eli clapped too, but his mind kept replaying those words. Underutilized areas. After the meeting, he walked past a display board showing a large, colorful map of the neighborhood. Blue zones marked new amenities. Green lines showed expanded pathways. But there were a few orange patches, marked future development. One of those orange patches overlapped part of his street. When he pointed it out to a board member, the man smiled. Oh, that's just for the playground extension. Nothing to worry about. Eli nodded, but deep down, something didn't sit right. The playground was nearly a block away from those houses. Still, the community buzzed with excitement for weeks. People talked about rising property values, safer parks, better lighting. The HOA meetings turned into social events, potlucks, photo ops, even drone footage of the proposed vision. But behind the cheerful posters and motivational quotes, paperwork was quietly moving through the county office. Rezoning requests, land evaluations, and corporate filings under names no one in the neighborhood recognized. Eli wouldn't learn about those for months, not until he began his investigation. But the seeds of suspicion were already there, buried beneath the polished surface of Cain's promises. One evening, while walking his dog near the east end of the subdivision, Eli noticed two men in hard hats measuring fences and marking the grass with spray paint. He asked what they were doing. One of them shrugged, muttered something about surveying for the improvement project, and kept working. But the markings didn't stop at the neighborhood trail. They crossed into private yards, even Mrs. Langley's property. Mrs. Langley was 76, lived alone, and had been there since the subdivision was built. Her husband helped pour the first foundation on that street. Now she stood on her porch, clutching the new HOA letter, confusion written all over her face. "They said my fence isn't on the property line anymore," she told Eli. "But I haven't moved it in 40 years. A few days later, she got another letter, this time, a notice of boundary adjustment. The tone was polite but cold. It mentioned possible fines if she didn't comply with future updates. Eli offered to help her read through the legal terms, and that's when he saw it. A paragraph at the bottom that said, "Certain parcels may be subject to reassessment and reallocation in accordance with the Community Improvement Initiative." That phrase again. Reallocation. Something was happening, something bigger than potholes and playgrounds. At the next HOA meeting, Eli stood up to ask questions. He wasn't confrontational, just curious. But the moment he mentioned the reassessment letters, the room went quiet. Richard Cain, smiling as always, leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Turner," he said smoothly, "we appreciate your engagement, but the board has already reviewed and approved all communications. Everything we're doing is within our authority. Let's move on." And just like that, Eli's microphone went dead. The meeting carried on without him. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats but said nothing. That night, Eli drove home in silence. The streets looked as peaceful as ever. Glowing porch lights, trimmed hedges, kids' bikes left in driveways. But to him, it all felt different now. The perfection of Willow Creek suddenly looked like camouflage. He didn't know it yet, but that was the night everything began to change. For him, for Mrs. Langley, for the entire community. The promise of progress had taken root, and soon it would grow into something no one could stop. Spring faded into summer, and the glow of the community improvement plan began to dim. The excitement that once filled every HOA meeting was replaced by confusion and quiet frustration. Construction hadn't started. The promised upgrades were delayed, but the HOA fees, they had quietly gone up. People noticed, they complained, but the board always had an answer. Delays in materials, supply chain issues. Just be patient. Progress takes time. Yet something didn't add up. The HOA's newsletters bragged about record investment and increased efficiency. But Eli noticed that the board had stopped publishing their usual expense reports, the ones they used to share proudly every quarter. When he asked for a copy, he got a polite email that said, "All records are available for review upon board approval." Approval. That single word meant one thing: he wasn't going to see them. But Eli wasn't the kind of man to let things go easily. One evening, after putting his kids to bed, he sat at his computer, scrolling through the county's public property database. Most people didn't know it existed, a website filled with old zoning maps, land deeds, and ownership transfers. He typed in Willow Creek Estates Improvement Project. Nothing. Then he searched for Richard Cain. Still nothing. But when he searched the company name listed on one of the HOA letters, WCE Redevelopment Partners, something appeared. It was small, just a few lines. But to Eli, it was a crack in the wall. The company had been registered only 6 months ago, right before the HOA announced their improvement plan. The registered agent, a man named Mark Ellis, Eli didn't recognize the name until he checked the HOA website and saw a familiar face. Mark Ellis was the HOA treasurer. Eerie note builds. Paper rustles. He clicked deeper, pulling up more records. The same company had quietly purchased several parcels of land near the eastern border of Willow Creek, land that had recently been rezoned from community space to commercial development. And the signatures on those rezoning forms, they matched the HOA board members. Eli leaned back in his chair, his stomach sinking. This wasn't just a coincidence. They weren't improving the neighborhood. They were buying it. Shift in music, investigative tension rising. Narrator. The next day, Eli visited the county office in person. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, handed him a thick folder. "Everything about the redevelopment plan should be in there," she said, glancing around nervously. "But I didn't tell you that." Inside were permits, zoning change requests, and a memo from a private development firm, Kane Development Group. Eli froze. Kane, the same last name as the HOA president. He scanned the pages faster now, flipping through copies of land deeds, each bearing the same pattern, transfers to shell companies, then to the same development group, all within weeks of one another. It was like watching a slow-motion heist, hidden behind legal jargon. Back home, he spread the papers across his dining table, pages overlapping like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Sarah walked in, folding her arms. "Eli, what is all this?" He looked up, exhausted but focused. "I think the HOA's selling off parts of the neighborhood, bit by bit." She frowned. "That can't be legal." "It's not," he said quietly. "Not if they're doing it without a community vote." He picked up a single document, a contract for property boundary optimization, Phase 2. It had been signed 2 months before the community meeting where Kane announced the project. They hadn't asked for permission. They had already decided. Sound of muffled chatter. A neighborhood meeting. The hum of fluorescent lights. Narrator. At the next HOA session, Eli waited until the floor opened for community questions. When his turn came, he stood slowly, holding a manila folder packed with documents. "Mr. Kane," he began, voice calm but firm. "Can you explain why the HOA treasurer is listed as the registered agent for WCE Redevelopment Partners, the same company buying land within our boundaries?" The room went silent. For a long second, Kane didn't speak. Then he smiled, that same perfect politician's smile. "Mr. Turner, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "Our partnership with outside entities is strictly for community benefit. It's standard practice. Nothing shady here." Eli didn't back down. "Then why were those deals signed before we even voted on the plan?" Kane's smile thinned. He leaned toward the microphone. "Sir, I'll remind you, this is a public meeting. Accusations like that can have serious consequences." Eli stared back, silent. Then, the board secretary, a woman named Janet Price, whispered something into Kane's ear. The microphone cut off. "Kane, next question, please." The meeting carried on, but not a single person asked anything after that. Low ambient hum, the sound of paper being fed into a scanner. Narrator. That night, Eli began scanning everything, every permit, every contract, every signature. He started organizing it all into folders labeled by date. It became an obsession. He worked late into the night, surrounded by coffee cups and the faint glow of his laptop. The deeper he dug, the darker it got. He discovered that 3 families on the edge of the neighborhood, the ones who had moved out suddenly last month, hadn't left by choice. Their properties had been bought under voluntary redevelopment agreements. But the payout wasn't voluntary at all. The HOA had fined them repeatedly until selling became their only escape. And each property sold for less than half its value. The buyers? Always the same shell company, WCE Redevelopment Partners. Eli realized what this really was, a land grab, hidden under the language of improvement. One night, as Eli sat reviewing documents, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A man's voice, low, nervous. "You don't know me," he said, "but you're right about the land transfers." Eli's heart pounded. "Who is this?" The man continued. "I used to work for the accounting firm that handles the HOA's books. They've been moving money through side accounts. You didn't hear this from me." Then the line went dead. Eli stared at his phone, the dial tone ringing in his ear. He didn't sleep that night. Somewhere out there, someone else knew the truth, and they were scared enough to stay hidden. The next morning, Eli received an email from the HOA. The subject line read, "Cease unverified inquiries." It was short, threatening, and clear. They knew he was digging, and they wanted him to stop. But he wouldn't stop. Because when powerful people start hiding paper trails, the only way to fight back is to follow them. Summer in Willow Creek Estates was usually the best time of year. Pool parties, barbecue nights, laughter echoing down cul-de-sacs that all looked the same. But that year, something felt off. The smiles were shorter, the conversations quieter, and the letters, those white envelopes stamped with the HOA logo, began showing up more often than ever before. At first, they were simple notices: trim your hedges, repaint your shutters, pressure wash your driveway. Then they got stranger. Unapproved landscaping alteration, violation, fence encroachment. And for some homeowners, something new: property reassessment pending. People didn't understand what it meant. The HOA said it was just part of the community improvement plan. But the letters came with an edge, a warning tone dressed as formality. When Mrs. Langley got her third notice in a week, she broke down crying on her porch. "They're saying I built my shed too close to the boundary line," she told Eli. "But my husband built that shed 20 years ago." Eli had been documenting everything: photos, letters, timestamps. What used to feel like paranoia was now starting to look like proof. Soft thunder rumbling in the distance. One night, he walked past the park and saw orange flags staked deep into the ground. A few days later, workers came and started tearing down the old oak tree that had shaded the playground for decades. The HOA claimed it was diseased, but there had been no inspection, no warning. Then came the surveyors again. New faces, new trucks, and they weren't just measuring public areas anymore. They were marking driveways, mailboxes, even backyards. When Eli tried asking them for identification, they refused. "Just following orders," one of them muttered. The next morning, a new sign appeared near the main entrance of the subdivision. "Future site of Willow Creek Expansion Project, Phase 2. Below that, in smaller letters, "Brought to you by WCE Redevelopment Partners." Eli's stomach turned. That name again, the shell company, the same one tied to Kane and Ellis. And yet, no one in the community seemed to realize what was happening. The HOA meetings grew tense. Every question about land use or transparency was brushed aside. The board insisted everything was legal, everything approved. When one homeowner, a young mother named Denise, stood up and asked why her backyard was suddenly classified as a utility easement, she was told to trust the process. Trust, that word used to mean something in Willow Creek. Now it sounded like a threat. Eli started to notice a pattern. The families receiving the harshest violation notices all lived near the edges of the neighborhood, the same areas marked for redevelopment. He began visiting them one by one. The Martins, who'd lived there for 11 years, were fined $500 for having a non-approved mailbox. The O'Connors were cited for a structural inconsistency on their fence. The Wilsons, fined daily for unkept lawn. Even though Eli mowed it himself the week before, all of them had one thing in common. Their homes bordered land the HOA was trying to acquire. Slowly, those families began to sell. Some quietly, some out of exhaustion, some because they couldn't keep up with the mounting fines that seemed designed to break them. Each sale was quick paperwork handled by the same real estate firm, Ellis Property Group. The same Ellis who handled the HOA finances. Coincidence? Eli didn't believe in those anymore. He started piecing everything together like a detective building a case. A spreadsheet of every home fined, every property sold, every permit filed. The pattern was undeniable. He printed it all and mailed a copy anonymously to the county zoning department. Days passed, then weeks. No response. But the HOA noticed. One morning, Eli walked out to his driveway and found his trash cans overturned, garbage strewn across the lawn. His mailbox door hung open, empty. Inside, a single piece of paper. No envelope, no signature. Just 3 words, scribbled in marker. "Stop digging, Eli." He froze, looked around. Every house looked peaceful. Sprinklers running, kids playing, neighbors waving as if nothing had happened. But someone had been there. Someone who wanted him to know they were watching. That night, Sarah begged him to stop. "You've done enough," she whispered. "They're dangerous." Eli shook his head. "If I stop now, they win." The next HOA meeting was chaos. Half the residents wanted answers. The other half wanted silence. Kane stood at the front, flanked by his board members like a row of statues. The topic was community beautification, but the questions turned quickly to the growing tension. Why are we getting fined for things that never mattered before? Where's the money from our increased fees going? Who approved the Phase 2 expansion? Kane's smile never wavered. "Change can be uncomfortable," he said. "But trust me, when this is done, Willow Creek will be the envy of every neighborhood in the county." He gestured to a set of blueprints on the screen, sleek, modern renderings of what looked like apartment buildings and commercial spaces. Eli's heart dropped. That wasn't improvement. That was development. He stood up. "That's not a community plan. That's a shopping center." Kane's voice hardened. "Mr. Turner, you've disrupted enough meetings. Please take your seat." "I have the paperwork," Eli shot back. "Land transfers, permits, fake companies, all tied to you." A hush fell over the room. For the first time, Kane's expression cracked. Just for a second. Then he leaned forward, icy calm. "Mr. Turner, unless you have official proof, these accusations border on defamation. We will not tolerate slander against this board." Eli stared at him, then at the faces around the room. His neighbors, people he'd known for years. Some looked frightened. Others looked away. No one spoke. And that silence, that heavy, suffocating silence, was how Kane won that night. After the meeting, Eli sat alone in his car, gripping the steering wheel. Through the window, he watched Kane laughing with other board members. It wasn't the laugh of a man doing community service. It was the laugh of someone untouchable. He started the engine but didn't drive home. Instead, he pulled out his phone and hit record. His voice, low and determined. "This is Eli Turner. If something happens to me, it's because of what I found in the Willow Creek HOA files." He ended the recording, saved it, and uploaded a copy to a cloud folder. Then he exhaled and whispered to himself, "They think they own this place. But not anymore." The cracks in Willow Creek were no longer invisible. The fences were falling. The lies too. But the board wasn't done yet. They had another plan, a secret one. And the next meeting would change everything. By late summer, Willow Creek Estates felt like a ghost of the neighborhood it once was. The grass was still perfect. The mailboxes still gleamed in the sun. But something invisible hung in the air. Mistrust. People no longer waved at each other. Conversations stopped when someone walked by. Eli Turner had become the name people whispered, the man they blamed for the tension that everyone felt but refused to admit. The HOA had painted him as a troublemaker, a paranoid voice trying to stir chaos. Yet beneath the gossip, Eli kept digging. He knew something was wrong. The numbers didn't match. The letters from the HOA were worded too carefully, and the so-called community improvements seemed to circle back to one thing: land. Then, one evening, when the light had turned gold and long shadows stretched across the street, his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. When he answered, a soft, trembling voice said, "Eli, it's Janet. You didn't hear this from me, but there's a private meeting tomorrow night at the clubhouse. No residents allowed." Before he could ask anything, the line went dead. He spent that night pacing. If he showed up, it could destroy what little peace he had left. But if he didn't, he might never know the truth. The next evening, as the sun sank behind the rows of perfect roofs, he parked his truck behind the maintenance shed near the clubhouse. Through the tall windows, he could see faint silhouettes gathered around the long wooden table. He recognized Richard Kane's shape instantly. Shoulders straight, hands folded like a man who thought he owned the world. Eli slipped along the hedges, crouching low, his phone camera rolling. The air was thick and warm. Through the glass, voices drifted out, muffled but clear enough. Kane spoke first, steady and confident. "Phase 2 is approved," he said. "The next 10 parcels are ready. Once we finalize the boundary changes, the development team can start surveying." Someone else asked what would happen if homeowners refused to sell. Kane didn't hesitate. "They'll sell eventually. We fine them for non-compliance. Let the debt build, then file for foreclosure. It's legal, clean, no mess." The room laughed. Eli pressed closer. He could make out another voice, Ellis, the treasurer. "The developers are asking when they can start grading," she said. Kane replied, "After the next community vote. We make it look like the residents asked for it. Optics matter." There was a pause. Then Janet's voice, soft and shaky. "What about Turner?" The air seemed to still. Kane's tone hardened. "Turner's noise. Every HOA has one. We'll drown him in fines until he either pays or gives up. If he pushes harder, we file against his property too." Someone chuckled. "And if anyone leaks information again," Kane continued, his voice cold, "I'll find out who. This project doesn't fail. Too much money at stake." A gust of wind rattled the hedge. Eli froze, heart pounding. For a second he thought someone inside had heard, but the conversation went on. He stayed until the lights dimmed, the voices faded, and the door finally opened. One by one, the board members stepped out and left. When the last car's headlights disappeared, he exhaled. His hands were shaking as he stopped the recording. He had them. Proof. Their words. Their plan. Everything. That night, he sat at the kitchen table replaying the recording again and again. Each sentence hit like a hammer. Sarah listened beside him, silent at first, then horrified. "You have to do something," she said. "This isn't just corruption, Eli. This is theft." He nodded slowly. "If I take it public now, they'll bury me in lawsuits before anyone listens. I need more." He spent the next few nights gathering every document he could find: board minutes, zoning maps, copies of property transfers. His garage turned into a wall of evidence. A crime scene made of paper and red string. In the center was Kane's photo. Every thread led back to him. Then, one night, a new email arrived from an unknown address. The message was short. "I heard the recording. I used to work for them. Let's talk." Attached was a single file, a confidential memo projecting nearly $5 million in Phase 2 property liquidations, signed by Kane and Ellis. Eli printed it all, sealed it in a manila envelope, and drove to the county commissioner's office the next morning. The commissioner looked through the papers slowly, his eyes narrowing. "If this is true," he said quietly, "this could take down half the development board." Eli said, "That's the plan." The man nodded once. "I'll look into it, but be careful. These people play rough." Eli walked out into the sunlight feeling something strange, a mix of fear and hope. He didn't see the black SUV parked across the street, its windows tinted so dark they reflected the sky. 2 nights later, he found his mailbox smashed, his car tires slashed, and no note, just silence. He stood in the driveway for a long moment, breathing hard. Then he looked toward the clubhouse and whispered, "You're scared. Good." The next day, the first news story broke online. Someone had leaked the audio. The headline read, "Local HOA accused of secret land seizures." Within hours, it spread across social media. News vans showed up at the gates. Reporters called for comments. Neighbors who once avoided Eli now stopped to ask what he knew. The story had escaped the board's control. For the first time, Richard Kane didn't show up to a meeting. The HOA canceled all public gatherings for safety reasons. But it was too late. The cracks had opened, and the truth was spilling out faster than anyone could contain it. By the time the morning sun rose over Willow Creek Estates, the world had changed. The story that had started with one man's suspicion was now splashed across every news outlet in the state. Reporters stood outside the gated entrance, their cameras aimed at the rows of identical houses, their voices urgent as they spoke of corruption, secret land deals, and homeowners trapped in a system they never agreed to. For years, the HOA board had ruled quietly, their power wrapped in politeness and bylaws. But that morning, their carefully crafted image shattered. Eli Turner stood at his front window, watching the spectacle unfold. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid him now stood in clusters, whispering his name like a warning and a prayer. He should have felt vindicated, but instead he felt hollow. The truth was out, yes, but the fight was far from over. By mid-morning, a statement from the HOA appeared online, dripping with the kind of corporate calm that made his skin crawl. The Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association categorically denies all allegations of misconduct. The recent claims are based on incomplete information and illegally obtained recordings. We remain committed to transparency and community improvement. Eli read it twice, his hands tightening into fists. Transparency, he muttered. They wouldn't know transparency if it hit them in the face. The front door knocked softly. He opened it to find Janet standing there. Her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like a shield. "They know it was me," she said. Her voice trembled. "Kane found out." Eli's heart sank. "How?" "I don't know," she said, stepping inside. "He called me last night. He said if I didn't retract my statement, he'd sue me for defamation. Said they'd take my house, my savings, everything." Eli shut the door and locked it. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "But now we finish what we started." She hesitated, then opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, and something that made Eli's pulse quicken. A spreadsheet labeled Beautification Fund Disbursements. Each entry listed payments from a company called Silverpath Holdings to the HOA's account, followed by property transfers and development permits. Janet pointed at the screen names. "These aren't donations," she said. "They're buyouts. They've been selling off pieces of the community, green spaces, trails, even the reserve land behind the east lots. Kane's been doing it for years." Eli leaned closer. "And the county?" Janet nodded. "He's got friends there too. But I think some of them didn't know the full picture. Not everyone's corrupt." Eli grabbed his phone. "Then let's find the ones who still care." That night, he called the county commissioner again. The man sounded weary, but his voice carried a trace of anger now. "Turner, I've been looking into it," he said. "You were right. There's more here than anyone thought. But Kane's lawyer is already making moves. They're threatening a lawsuit against anyone who prints the story." "Let them," Eli said. "We've got evidence." "Be careful," the commissioner warned. "Kane's not just a board president. He's tied into development projects all over this county. He's been working both sides of the fence for years." After the call, Eli sat in the darkened kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He felt the weight of what they were up against. This wasn't just about one HOA anymore. This was bigger. The next morning, as he combed through the documents again, a detail caught his eye. On one of the zoning maps, a shaded area stood out, land that wasn't supposed to belong to Willow Creek at all. It was labeled Public Reserve B, under reassessment. But the reassessment date matched the same day the HOA approved their community expansion project. Eli's mind raced. How could the HOA reassign public land? That wasn't just overreach, it was fraud. He opened another file, tracing the signatures. Kane's name appeared on every document, along with a stamped approval from a planning official whose office had since been reorganized. By mid-afternoon, another headline hit the internet: Willow Creek HOA linked to countywide land transfers. News anchors used phrases like possible conspiracy and systemic fraud. People began digging, and what they found was terrifying. Silverpath Holdings wasn't just tied to Willow Creek. It was connected to at least 6 other HOA communities across the region, each one involved in identical community improvement projects. And sitting on the board of Silverpath Holdings was none other than Richard Kane. Eli's phone buzzed nonstop: reporters, residents, lawyers. His inbox flooded with messages, some praising him, others accusing him of destroying the community's reputation. He ignored them all until one message caught his attention. The sender was unknown. The text read, "You think you've won? Look outside." He moved slowly to the window. Down the street, a black SUV idled at the curb, its windows tinted so dark they reflected the streetlights. Inside, a figure sat perfectly still, the faint red glow of a cigarette the only movement. They stayed for almost a full minute before the engine revved and the car rolled silently away. That night, Eli barely slept. At dawn, sirens screamed down the road. The old HOA storage facility, where years of meeting records, receipts, and contracts were kept, was burning. By the time firefighters arrived, the roof had collapsed. The news called it an electrical accident. Eli knew better, but what Kane and his allies didn't know was that Janet had made digital backups of everything. She had copied every email, every file, every ledger. They can burn their past, Eli said to himself, but the truth is already out there. 2 days later, Janet vanished. Her car was found at the edge of the walking trail, the driver's door open, her purse still inside. There were no footprints, no sign of a struggle, nothing. The police treated it as a missing persons case, but Eli knew this wasn't random. He stood at the trailhead that night, staring into the trees, the shadows whispering around him. "You're not gone," he murmured. "You're scared. And they did this to you." For days he searched. The media frenzy began to fade, the world's attention moving on to the next scandal. The HOA board dissolved quietly. The neighbors stopped asking questions. Life began to settle into uneasy silence. And then, one morning, Eli found a letter in his mailbox. No name, no return address. Inside was a flash drive. He plugged it into his computer, heart pounding. A single video file appeared, timestamped 6 months earlier. He pressed play. The footage was grainy, a camera hidden in the corner of a conference room, the same one where the board used to meet. Kane stood at the head of the table, gesturing toward a large map pinned to the wall. "This is phase 2 through 6, he said. "Every parcel, every boundary adjustment. Once the fines start piling up, we move to foreclose. The HOA buys the property back through liens, and then Silverpath takes over. Clean and legal. Homeowners won't even see it coming." Another voice asked, "What about Turner?" Kane smirked. "Turner's a distraction. By the time he figures it out, he'll be living on land that doesn't belong to him anymore." Eli sat back, staring at the screen in disbelief. Someone had recorded this. Someone had known. And the file, it had to have come from Janet. Somehow, before she disappeared, she had hidden it where she knew he'd find it. He closed his laptop, grabbed his keys, and drove straight to the county building. When he handed the flash drive to the commissioner, the man looked up at him with wide eyes. "You realize this could expose half the county," he said quietly. Eli nodded. "Then let it." By the following week, the arrests began. Not just Kane, but developers, lawyers, even 2 county officials. The evidence from that video had unraveled a network of fraud stretching far beyond Willow Creek. The story that had started as a neighborhood dispute became a statewide scandal. When it was over, Eli returned to his quiet street. The manicured lawns were still there, but now there was a different kind of peace, a hard-earned one. He walked the trails at dusk, the golden light filtering through the trees. Near the old wooden fence by the pond, he found something new carved into the post, for Janet, who told the truth. He stood there for a long time, listening to the soft hum of crickets, feeling the weight of her absence and the echo of what she had started. He whispered, "You didn't disappear. You made them listen." As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. One new email. No sender. The subject line read, "Phase 7. He opened it. A document loaded, development plans for a new community 2 counties away. Same blueprint. Same name. Silverpath Holdings. Eli exhaled slowly, the sunset burning deep orange behind the rooftops. "So," he said quietly, "we start again." The moment Eli opened that email, time seemed to slow. The screen glowed faintly in the dark room, and the words Phase 7 stared back at him like an accusation. The document attached was detailed street grids, parcel numbers, projected revenue, and a familiar logo stamped in the corner, Silverpath Holdings. Only this time, the location wasn't Willow Creek. It was a new development miles away, in a place called Clearwater Ridge. The same formula, the same playbook, the same lie wrapped in the words, community improvement. He leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. After everything that had happened, the arrests, the hearings, the endless interviews, he thought it was over. But the machine had just shifted its gears. Kane was gone, yes, but someone else had taken the reins. The handwriting on the bottom of the blueprint confirmed it. Approved by Interim Director M. Havel. Eli didn't recognize the name, but he didn't need to. He knew what it meant. Silverpath had found a new face. For days he tried to ignore it. He told himself he had done enough, that he couldn't spend the rest of his life chasing shadows. But every time he looked around Willow Creek, every fence post and quiet street reminded him of what had been almost stolen. The truth was like a splinter under his skin. He couldn't let it go. One evening, as the sky deepened to violet, he got in his truck and drove toward Clearwater Ridge. The road wound through old farmland and newly cleared lots, the scent of fresh-cut earth heavy in the air. When he reached the construction site, the sign greeted him like déjà vu, future home of Clearwater Ridge, a Silverpath community. The words shimmered under the glow of floodlights, identical to the banners that once hung over Willow Creek's clubhouse. He parked at the edge of the lot and stepped out. The sound of machinery had died for the night, but a trailer still glowed at the far end of the site. Inside, a man sat at a desk, typing. Eli moved closer, staying in the shadows. Through the window, he could see the man's face, a little younger than Kane, but with the same sharpness in his eyes, the same self-assured smirk. Papers were stacked high on the desk, and at the top was a familiar document marked Land Use Conversion, Confidential. Eli raised his phone and took a photo through the glass. The man looked up suddenly, his gaze sweeping the darkness. For a moment, their eyes met through the reflection. Then Eli stepped back, heart hammering, and disappeared into the night. The next morning, he sent the photo and the Clearwater Ridge documents to the state investigator handling the Silverpath case. Hours later, his phone rang. "Turner," the voice said, calm but urgent. "Where did you get this?" Eli hesitated. "It came to me. I don't know who sent it." "Well, whoever did, they've opened something big." The new name on those forms, Marcus Havel, used to be the assistant to Kane's attorney. He's expanding Silverpath under a different shell company. And there's more. We think they moved money offshore before the first indictments. Eli pinched the bridge of his nose. So they just change names and start again. The investigator side, that's how people like this survive. But with your evidence, we can connect the dots. We just need someone on the inside. That phrase, on the inside, hung in Eli's mind long after the call ended. He knew what it meant. Someone would have to infiltrate the operation, find the proof before it vanished again. And there was only one person who could still do that. He spent the next few days trying to trace the source of the email. The address was encrypted, bouncing through several proxies. But late one night, as he followed another digital trail, his screen flashed a message, "Stop digging." Then the cursor moved on its own, and a second message appeared beneath it. "She's alive." Eli froze. His throat tightened. "Janet?" he whispered to the empty room. A new file downloaded automatically, a small image. Blurry, pixelated, but unmistakable. Janet, sitting in what looked like a hospital room. A newspaper dated 2 days earlier on the table beside her. She was thinner, paler, but alive. Eli's chest tightened. He tried replying, but the message bounced back. No trace, no sender, just gone. The next morning, he drove to the hospital whose logo appeared faintly in the photo. The receptionist hesitated when he asked for Janet. "Sir, we can't disclose patient information. I just need to know if she's okay," he said softly. After a moment, she lowered her voice. "She left this morning. Didn't say where she was going." He walked back to his truck, heart heavy but burning with determination. Janet was alive, And if she was reaching out, it meant she still had something to say. That night, another email came. This time, it was a video message. Janet's voice filled the room, faint but steady. Eli, if you're watching this, then you found Clearwater Ridge. They think they're safe, but they're not. Silverpath is just a name. The real company is hidden under an investment group called Meridian Estates. They're using HOAs to launder land, taking public reserves, rezoning them, and selling them back to private investors overseas. It's bigger than any of us thought. She paused, her voice shaking. Be careful. The last person who tried to expose them disappeared for good. You can't trust anyone, not even the investigators. The screen went black. Eli sat there in silence for a long time. The sound of the refrigerator hum filled the air again. The whole thing had started as a neighborhood dispute. Now it was a national scheme. By the next morning, Clearwater Ridge was crawling with federal agents. The story had broken again, this time not by Eli but by Janet. Somehow, she had gone public herself, releasing everything through an anonymous whistleblower channel. The footage from inside Silverpath's meetings, the money transfers, the offshore accounts, all of it. The media called it the HOA scandal of the century. Kane's replacement, Marcus Havel, was arrested at his office, stunned and furious. The entire Silverpath operation collapsed within days. When the dust settled, Eli drove back to Willow Creek. The street was quiet again. No reporters, no police cars, just the hum of sprinklers and the faint laughter of children. The world had moved on. But this time it felt different, felt earned. He walked down to the edge of the trail, where the carving still read, "For Janet, who told the truth." He smiled faintly. This time he knew she was out there somewhere, free. A light breeze stirred the leaves. Somewhere behind him, a car door closed, and a familiar voice said softly, "You really thought I'd let them win?" He turned. Janet stood there, her hair tied back, her eyes tired but alive. She smiled faintly. "They wanted to bury me. Instead, I buried them." Eli exhaled, laughing in disbelief. "You disappeared." "I had to," she said. "They would have killed me if I hadn't." They stood there for a long moment in silence, the wind whispering between them. Then she said, "It's not over, Eli. Clearwater was just one branch. There are more." He nodded slowly. "Then we keep digging." She looked toward the sunset. "They called it community improvement," she said quietly. "But it was really a land grab." Eli followed her gaze. The light glowed orange across the rooftops, and for the first time it didn't look like the end of something. It looked like the beginning of a reckoning. The night of the confrontation began without warning. No phone call, no meeting request, just a single text message on Eli's phone, sent from an unknown number at 9:47 p.m. "You want the truth? Meet me where it all started." There was no name, but Eli didn't need one. He knew exactly what it meant. The old clubhouse at Willow Creek, the one where the first community improvement meeting had taken place, where Kane had stood at the front of the room promising a brighter future while quietly planning a takeover. Now it stood abandoned. The HOA had long since moved their operations elsewhere, and the property had been sold and reclaimed twice over. Yet somehow, tonight the lights were on again. Eli parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance. The air was cool and heavy, the kind of night where even the crickets seemed hesitant to make a sound. When he reached the building, he saw the front door ajar. Inside, a single bulb flickered weakly above the table. He stepped in slowly. In the center of the room sat a man, Marcus Havel. His hands were cuffed, his suit jacket rumpled, a thin smile curling across his face. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said. Eli frowned. "You're supposed to be in custody." "Oh, I was," Marcus said, leaning back, "until the people who really run things decided I was more valuable on the outside. You didn't think this ends with me or Kane, did you?" Eli stayed silent. Marcus's tone sharpened. "You and your little whistleblower made a lot of noise. Enough to make the front page, sure. But that's all it ever is, noise. They'll replace me just like they replaced Kane. Different name, different logo. Same land, same plan." Eli's jaw tightened. "You're saying it keeps going?" Marcus laughed softly. Of course it keeps going. Do you really think the government wants to stop it? They need development. They need the illusion of progress. HOAs, zoning boards, planning commissions, they're all just gears in the same machine. Eli took a step closer. Then who's behind it? Marcus smirked. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. From behind, a door creaked open. Janet stepped into the light, her expression unreadable. She carried a small drive in her hand. I already know, she said quietly. Marcus's smirk faltered. You. She dropped the drive onto the table. Every document, every offshore account, every fake trust fund, they all lead back to Meridian Estates. But here's the part you left out, Marcus. Meridian isn't a company. It's a government contractor. A subsidiary of a real estate trust managed by a senator's family office. Eli froze. You're saying this goes all the way to Washington? Janet nodded. It started there. Silver Path was just their pilot program. They tested it in small towns, Willow Creek, Clearwater Ridge, dozens of others. Once they knew they could seize HOA land under the banner of public improvement, they scaled it. Billions in hidden assets. Parks, roads, wetlands, all flipped to private hands and leased back to the same communities they stole from. Marcus's face had gone pale. You don't know what you're doing. They'll come for you. Janet's voice didn't waver. They already did. They failed. She pulled a small recorder from her pocket and pressed play. A voice echoed through the empty room. Kane's voice. Proceed with Phase 7. The senator has approved. Once the land titles transfer, we'll reassign ownership through Meridian. The locals won't even notice until it's over. Eli stared at the recorder. You had this the whole time? Janet nodded. I hid it before they came for me. It's why they wanted me gone. Outside, the sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. Headlights swept across the window. A black SUV pulled up, followed by another. Marcus's expression shifted to something like fear. They're here, he whispered. Janet looked to Eli. We can't stay. They bolted for the side exit as the door burst open. Men in dark suits poured into the room, flashlights cutting through the dust. Shouts echoed behind them, but Janet and Eli were already gone, disappearing into the night and vanishing down the trail that led toward the lake. They didn't stop until they reached the water's edge. The moon shimmered across the surface, silver and still. Janet caught her breath. We have to go public. Everything. Names, evidence, recordings. No redactions. Eli nodded. Once it's out, they can't bury it again. They uploaded the files that night, videos, bank records, secret correspondence, everything. Within hours, the internet exploded. Major networks picked it up, watchdog groups verified the data, and the senator named in the recordings was forced into hiding. For days, the nation was transfixed. People across the country began digging into their own communities, uncovering similar shell companies, similar deals. What started in Willow Creek became a movement. Weeks later, Eli stood again at the edge of the lake, now calm and quiet. He held his phone, scrolling through the news. National HOA corruption probe expands to 15 states. Below the headline, a photo of Janet, her face half turned away, labeled only as anonymous source B. He smiled faintly. Behind him, footsteps approached. Janet's voice was soft. They'll rebuild, you know. They always do. Eli turned to her. Then we keep watching. She nodded. That's what they never counted on. A long pause stretched between them, filled by the sound of the water lapping at the shore. Then Eli said, You ever wonder why people like Kane do it? Why they take what isn't theirs? Janet looked at the horizon. Because they think ownership means power. But they never understood. The land remembers who it belongs to. They stood in silence as the first light of dawn crept over the rooftops. The town was quiet again, just as it had been before everything began. But beneath that calm, something had shifted. People had learned to question, to read the fine print, to ask who truly benefits from community improvement. Eli watched the sunrise, feeling the weight of it all finally start to lift. You know, he said, for the first time in a long time, it feels like maybe we're not alone in this. Janet smiled faintly. We never were. We just needed to listen. As the sun rose higher, the reflection of Willow Creek shimmered across the water. Familiar, yet changed. The houses stood still. The trees whispered softly, and somewhere, the truth that had once been buried beneath asphalt and greed began to take root again. The story of Willow Creek wasn't just about one neighborhood anymore. It had become something larger, a reminder that sometimes the smallest battles, the quietest voices, are the ones that rewrite the rules. And as the camera panned upward, the faint echo of Janet's words lingered in the air, words that would become a rallying cry across the country. They called it community improvement, but it was really a land grab. The screen faded to black. Sometimes the biggest betrayals don't happen in boardrooms or back alleys. They happen in our own neighborhoods, behind smiling faces, behind promises of beautification, revitalization, and progress. They called it community improvement. But what it really was control. For years, homeowners across America have been told that HOAs exist to protect property values, to keep order, to maintain the dream of perfect suburban life. But what happens when that same system becomes the weapon, when rules meant to preserve a neighborhood become the blueprint for taking it away? Willow Creek was never meant to be famous. It was just another quiet town on the map. But it became something more, a mirror, a reflection of how easily people can be manipulated by words like investment, development, enhancement, and how those words can hide a hunger for power and profit so deep that entire communities can disappear beneath it. Eli and Janet were just two people who refused to look away. They weren't detectives or journalists or politicians. They were neighbors, ordinary people who decided that silence was no longer an option. And when they pulled one thread, they discovered a pattern that reached all the way to the top, a pattern built on greed, secrecy, and lies. But in the end, it wasn't the powerful who won. It was the truth. And the truth has a way of surviving, even when buried under concrete, paperwork, and corruption. Because every neighborhood, every community, every small town has someone like Eli, someone who notices when things don't add up, someone who asks the questions everyone else is too afraid to ask, and someone who knows that the phrase, "for the good of the community," doesn't always mean what it seems. Maybe that's the real lesson of Willow Creek. That power doesn't always wear a suit, and corruption doesn't always come with a warning sign. Sometimes, it just knocks on your door with a smile and a clipboard. So the next time you hear the words community improvement, take a closer look. Ask who it's really improving and who's paying the price. Because what happened in Willow Creek wasn't just a story. It was a warning. And as long as there are people willing to listen, the truth will never be completely buried.